Hello and welcome to another Score Attack podcast. I am your host Mirog, and with me tonight, as every night, is the loyal, friendly, the person who believes me, Johnny. Hello, Johnny.
Hello.
So, Johnny, how you been doing?
I've been doing pretty well. Haven't been doing much of anything last week, just taking like a rest week or something. I don't know.
Does playing games count as nothing, or does it count as something?
Well, I haven't played that much games. I played a little bit of each. A little bit here and there, but not a huge amount.
I saw you've been playing a bunch of strategy games.
Yeah, I have this huge just library of strategy games on Steam that I've barely touched because many of them are best in multiplayer, and I have had trouble finding people to play them with regularly.
Yeah, I think everybody knows that feeling with the endless backlog for various reasons. Yeah, I'm mostly just blood-eyed and tired from playing Grimrock the past several days. It's like whenever I open my eyes, I see puzzles and puzzles everywhere.
Yeah,
But but yeah, for today we can talk about Grimrock in more detail maybe someday. But for now, our topic for today is difficulty in games. So Johnny, do you like hardcore games for hardcore people like yourself?
that's like the last way I would ever put it, but I guess yes.
Well, it's been kind of a big deal recently. Well, the past few years, because as gaming got more and more mainstream, games started becoming more and more accessible, whether it's just the casual market or, mainstream games deciding to uh, be more approachable, have less trial and error, more patting on the back, you did a good job, Mr. Player thing. And people seem to miss proper hardcore difficult games, and that's where this new, well, not subgenre, but I just like say type of game has emerged recently where you have all your super meat boys, all your roguelikes and roguelites and whatnot. So tell me, do, have you been playing mostly those kind of games recently, or do you just like think, oh yeah, all the easy games they're easier because it's easier design now?
Well, I mean, there's I play a large variety of games, some of them based a lot in storytelling, and those aren't really relevant for this discussion. The thing that's happened in mainstream games is that the mainstream game market does what the mainstream game market always does, and it tries to pander to the largest audience possible. That's always gonna be how it's gonna be with mainstream games. That's just the thing now, and it's gonna be that way pretty much forever. And in a way, that's okay. Like the most mainstream big budget games are always gonna pander to a large market. I do enjoy a lot of the harder stuff though, and I think there is definitely value in still having them. Just not every game needs to be that way. Just like in the quest to like grab a larger market, yes, the mainstream games makers have made a lot of easier stuff, but as part of being like more inclusive and be grabbing a larger market, a part of that is like having a variety of different types of games. That's sort of what we're seeing now. That we're having like some easy games, some hard games, some games based in like really granular mechanics, some games with like interlocking systems that become really complex when you start looking at the great picture, and it's a huge variety of different things, and that's both like inevitable as the audience matures and as the market grows wider, and a really good thing, I think.
Yeah, well, I usually just play anything I get my hands on. I don't really, I don't really make that distinction between, oh, this game is difficult. I'm just gonna play difficult games because that's kind of hardcore, intense person I am. It's mostly just if a game feels too easy for what it's trying to do, I don't know, I generally just see that as something that nags me, and it also goes the other way. If I feel like a game is unnecessarily too hard, it's also something that I don't like. For example, I played when I play a modern shooter on normal difficulty, if it can be easy, like I can not die once, and it might feel like okay, that this is a good balance for this kind of game or for this game in particular. I mean, I grew up with a bunch of old school games, so I'm 8-bit era generation, or at least like played 8-bit games for a long time. And really, when you go back to them, I never feel like I never feel like when I play today's games that say, "Oh yeah, we're old school, we're as difficult as the games of the ye olden days." I never feel like that's true because when I play old games, they aren't really that difficult. If they're difficult, it's mostly due to clunky controls or just the developers being dicks.
Yeah, like we look back at a lot of the older games, like oh, this the games used to be much harder than, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, the most popular of the old games aren't really that hard. Like Super Metroid isn't that hard. A Link to the Past isn't that hard. Yeah, you do have like Silver Surfer for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That's really hard, and nobody liked it. Not
I
even
mean,
the people who like hard games like Silver Surfer. Nobody likes Silver Surfer.
I mean, even then, the hard games that uh people quote, people remember as being good and hard are usually games that were really hard for that time as well, like the Shinobi games. Well, the first Shinobi games without Shinobi 3, they were brutal. They weren't even coin munchers. I mean, they were coin munchers, but it wasn't that made them difficult. They were just legitimately brutal, and people even back then knew them as very, very difficult games, and it was still good. I mean, you could say that Shinobi was the Dark Souls of the 90s, but
Oh god damn it! Did it? Oh, I
I'm
hate those
just,
comparisons. You know I hate them.
well, better than saying it's the Citizen Kane of gaming, but anyway.
That's based. Okay, okay. Dark Souls is the Citizen Kane of gaming in that people make stupid comparisons to Dark Souls like they make stupid comparisons to Citizen Kane.
I don't think you can scroll a Steam review these days of a moderately difficult game without somebody fishing for upvotes and saying, "Oh yeah, this is the Dark Souls of insert genre here."
Chris Remo of Idle Thumbs called uh, Desert Golfing the Dark Souls of golfing games, and I almost wanted to throw my phone out the window.
Yeah, those are very bad, but we'll get to Dark Souls, or at least you'll probably get to Dark Souls since you've played it much, 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 much more than me. Uh, I want to say mostly, yeah, it feels like old games are being put on a pedestal for their difficulty, but for most part, what I remember from difficult games is, them being clunky, them being unfair. I mean, here's an actual example. So I had, you know what Pac-Mania is?
Not entirely.
So Pac-Mania is early 90s, late 80s, I think, game which was originally on arcades. It's Pac-Man, but it's isometric top-down. So you still go through um, a maze, random mazes, and the thing is, it's uh, this 3D effect on it, so it looks so that when you see it, it's one of those games that you think as a kid, this is how all games will look in the future. And the big deal about that one was that you could jump because it was 3D, so you could jump over ghosts. Anyway, I had the Master System for that thing, one of 3 games I owned, and there's this I could never beat it. There was this level I kept getting to, and the issue with the game is that it had this very subtle progression of new difficult elements. For example, first you start off with slow and stupid ghosts. Then they introduce a purple ghost which follows you, and then they introduce green ghosts, which jump. Then they super speed up all the green ghosts, and then they speed up all the dumb ghosts, and then they speed up the purple ghost. Now, when I say speed up, you have extremely snailish slow, you have medium speed, which is around your speed, and you have twice your freaking speed. So that means that essentially, if a purple ghost sees you, he will hunt you to the ends of the universe and will catch you because he follows you and is faster.
That sounds pretty stupid.
Well, the thing was, in theory, you could beat it because every maze had a hidden intersection which forced a ghost to take a turn regardless of its type. So you had to figure out which those intersections were and just lead them there. But the problem was the maps were huge. I'm talking several screen sizes huge because you could not see the map all at once. You just saw that part, zoomed in part on your screen. Anyway, I never beat that game, and after I got a PC and I figured out emulation, at one point I decided, hey, I'm just gonna save scum through that game I've never beaten and just see what the thing is. So after that level that I never beat, the brutal difficult one, the game actually glitches out. And not and this is and listen, this isn't actually oh, this game crashed or something stupid like that. No, it's because the scaling breaks and the ghosts become so fast they are all stuck looping in one and the same corner of the map, and the game becomes brutally easy because all the ghosts are just running around the same square in the lower left corner.
So it is this like an official Pac-Man game?
Yeah, it's completely official. It was in the arcades. It's not in bootleg. It's not a non-legit black market game. It was actually a game. It was an attempt at making a new
That's
Pac-Man
so
game.
weird.
It is, and then when you tell me, and you know that game was hard, and you can just tell me, oh, you're not hardcore enough for it. Well, obviously the developers weren't hardcore enough to actually playtest the damn thing.
Yeah, the
But
the whole hardcore enough thing is just people being stupid.
that's horrible. I mean, you also have to factor in that. Well, it's hard to actually prove this, but you also have to factor in that maybe people just became better at games in general. I mean, I know when I played the first Super Mario Bros. For the NES, I know my lives were always in the single digits for most part. I mean, without using glitches, you know. And when I tried I think it's New Super Mario Bros. On the regular DS, it was I was 5 levels in and I had 40 lives or something. Like I only kept dying because I wanted to get all the coins and just went with leaps of faith to figure out how to get them. But I don't know. I mean, you also have to factor that in. But maybe it's just bullcrap. Maybe games are actually easier and we just retain the similar skill level as before.
The Mario games are, well, they've never been too hard, really. With the exception, I guess, of the Lost Levels. That
And
that one is actually hard. Like I never completed it.
neither have I. I think when you play Lost Levels, you actually realize where all those hacked Mario ROMs came from. I mean, Lost Levels is essentially a textbook of how to stretch the Super Mario system as far as you can and make the most brutal crap possible.
And it's not even fun hard
It's not.
most
It's
of the
it's
time.
not. Yeah, it's not. Well, it's not being fun for me at least after
And
some
Mario
point.
isn't built to be hard. Like that's the thing with many of the hard old games. They were just hard for the sake of being hard. Usually there was no rhyme or reason to the ways in which they were hard.
Well, people didn't really know how to develop games back then. I mean, um, I always know. I remember this anecdote I heard once about I have no mouth and I must scream, the game, and there's this one part where Harlan Ellison wanted one outcome, like one character forgiving another character from his backstory, And the developer said, no, 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 we should actually put that the interaction is this and this. But that makes no sense. Well, it doesn't matter because that's how games work, because what you said is too easy. People will actually figure it out. And, I think that's also a neat thing to factor in because I mean, most people didn't even know how to make games. I mean, the textbook examples of great games, a lot of them, they weren't made with the intention of, oh yeah, this is gonna be a hallmark in gaming, like something people will reference for the rest of their lives. It was all most of it was accidents.
No game that actually ends up being one of those hallmark games set out to do so. Like if you set out with the intention of being like the best ever, this is what everyone is going to copy later, then you fail. You end up with Too Human or something.
Yeah, I also remember like Maniac Mansion was also just made as one of the lead designers said that they just made that game hoping they'd keep their jobs after it, and it turned out to be the main example of how to make classic adventure games. And I know I even heard Dark Souls. We're just gonna reference Dark Souls a bunch. I heard that game was also made um just made as a game and then made regularly, and then they didn't even expect the kind of following they got, or well, with Demon Souls at least.
Well, I think it's true for both of them that both of the games that it kind of caught them off guard. Demon Souls wasn't very popular on launch but sold well later,
Mhm.
and Dark Souls had a similar thing where it, like at first reviews weren't super positive because the review version of the game was actually nearly impossible because they had the soul scaling for like leveling up was so out of hand that you basically couldn't level up and you couldn't get humanities items to connect to the online stuff, and all the online stuff was down, so you couldn't even get help online. And the review version of that game sounds like it was a mess.
Yeah, I don't know.
And eventually it goes on to becoming like a huge cult hit, but it certainly wasn't at the outset.
Honestly, I played a bit of Demon Souls, but I never got into it. I mean, I just played the starting area and then got to that whole teleport nexus thing for the first time, and I didn't really get into it. And then I tried Dark Souls, and I just rage quit that game. And it was I played for a full hour, and I think it might have been my fault because I expected from what some people told me. They told me, "Oh yeah, Dark Souls is hard, but you never feel like it's unfair because it's all things you could actually stop or influence." And then I played it and realized that was utter bullshit.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's bullshit. I just think it's true in a different way than you expect. Because Dark Souls isn't really an action game. It has a control scheme like an action game, and it looks like an action game, and the camera is like if it were an action game, but it's more of a strategy RPG than anything.
I think that's the problem actually because the presentation of it implies so many things that I either didn't get or that I completely misinterpreted. I mean, I flailed away at the skeletons in the starting area for 10 minutes until I just gave up, and then I realized, oh wait, there's a path to the left as well.
There's actually three different paths from the Firelink Shrine, and I don't know why everyone goes to the graveyard.
Because it's a giant, because when you get there, it's the thing you can most relate to in the sense of I see whole path, and I see a graveyard. Oh, okay, I'm a knight, they're undead, I have a sword, I should probably whack some undead with a sword because, so far I've been taught that this game has combat, has vaguely fantasy-ish, and all that. I mean, I don't know, it just feels like the visual cues are really off, and you're really punished for, I wouldn't say experimenting, but for trying to figure out the game.
You're not really punished for it. I mean, you die, but dying in Dark Souls isn't particularly punishing. Because once you've been through an area, like, it's really easy to get back to where you were. If you've actually, like, learned how to fight the things you already fought, it's pretty easy to get past, and if you do get back to where you died, you just get back all your souls, everything you lost.
Unless you
So
fall into a pit, or was it when
e-
you fall into a pit?
even if you fall into a pit, because the thing it does is it spawns your bloodstain a certain number of minutes before, not minutes, but a certain number of seconds before you died. It
Hmm.
just rewinds, places the bloodstain at a relatively safe location, and if you get there, you get all your stuff back. And the thing about Dark Souls, like, people talk about it like it's super punishing, but it's deceptively generous to the player because you keep dying, but you keep collecting souls, you keep getting back to your bloodstain, you keep advancing slowly, and as you do this, you keep collecting souls from all the enemies you kill on every one of your tries. And by the time you get to the boss and kill the boss of the area, you have, like, the more you've died, the more you've been killed by the enemies, the more souls you're gonna have at the end when you kill the boss. Assuming you keep getting to your bloodstain and collecting your souls, assuming you don't make a stupid mistake twice in a row.
I don't know, man. Like I said, I tried to crack that nut, and it just felt like all the all the visual cues, all the design cues, I just didn't get. And I've read a lot up on Dark Souls, as in not walkthroughs, but general people's impressions and thoughts. I also, from what I gather, I also guess that it's a very community-oriented game because a lot of the stuff either relies or assumes you'll exchange information with other players and figure out how to do stuff.
Well, yes and no. Like, there's a some level of it. Like, it expects you to use, like, the message system and stuff uh, to help give hints to other people, and it assumes that at some point, if you get stuck, you're gonna summon another player to help you with something and stuff like that. But I think that aspect of the game has been exaggerated some by the press as well, because most of the secrets in the game, like most of the things you actually need to find, aren't that hard. There are some secrets that are actually hard to find. There are secret areas like the the painted world of Ariamis that you may just completely miss on your first run through. If you just go like the critical path, and you talk about visual cues, some of the critical path is pretty obvious at most parts of that game. The actual secret areas are not as obvious. There's a path where you go into the swamp below New Londo. You go into the Blight Town, and at some point, if you go left to what is seemingly a dead end and crawl up to a tree where there's a chest, there's a fog wall behind. There's a hidden wall that you can
Mhm.
go through. Behind that hidden wall is a chest, and behind that chest is another hidden wall you can go through. If you go through the second hidden wall, if you go through the second wall, you come come into the like this huge inside the tree trunk of this gigantic tree. You can go down, like, it probably takes like 20-30 minutes for you to get down there the first try. You go down and you find this whole new area that has like a hidden covenant, which isn't like necessary or even that good to get, but just like hidden content and like a hidden boss that just exists down there.
Well, it sounds good. It sounds fine. I mean, I want to try the game again, but I don't know. It doesn't feel for me. And this is coming from someone who enjoys God Hand quite a bit. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite games ever. And
Well, I
that's
mean,
also notorious for its difficulty.
I've barely played God Hand. I played it once for like 5 minutes and too long ago to really remember much about it. But from what I can tell, like it's both an equal and opposite to Dark Souls in that it's like both
Yeah.
of games are super hard or have this well, at least on the surface, super hard games, but the way they go about it and their goals for being super hard are very different. The goals that Dark Souls has with being super hard is really like it it tries to reward players for thinking, for being smart, for being clever, for predicting things, for just being creative. Like, yes, Dark Souls will kill you a lot of times, but you go to the graveyard once, and if you figure out that this is too hard, there must be another way, and go away. It rewards you for that because that's how you find your way to the next area. And like the more you start to think about the game, like try to figure out its secrets, the more it rewards you for it. And that's the kind of thinking that Dark Souls wants you to do. It wants you to be like, well, what happens if I like throw a firebomb over this wall and like kill these enemies before they even see me? There's like there are ways, and it's hard to tell what in Dark Souls is intentional ways to get around things and what are so-called glitches.
Yeah, see, now that you mentioned, like, when you you go to a graveyard, you die, and that should be your message to not go to the graveyard. I mean, technically, the moment you take too much damage, that should be your hint to get the fuck away from there. But I think that's what I didn't like about Dark Souls the most, that I felt at least like it's assumed that well, it's assumed that I will die, but in the sense that, oh yeah, the player will figure this out after dying. Whereas in God Hand, like God Hand is a game where you will die a whole bunch, but you never feel like you should have died. You never, when you make a mistake, it's very transparent why you got hit, why an attack didn't work. The audiovisual cues are the animations are very transparent, and even if you do die, you don't feel like the game is cheating on you. You feel like, yeah, that's a death that could have been avoided. I know why I lost. Whereas in Dark Souls, a lot of times I felt for example, when I encountered the first big dark scary night thing there that I realized were scattered throughout the levels, I figured, oh, okay, let's try and defeat this guy, and I just got decimated, and I didn't even realize why because it happened so fast. I don't know, I just I kind of feel like that's the main difference between the Souls games and God Hand, is that God Hand feels fair in its difficulty, whereas I never felt like Dark Souls was being fair.
Well, that's the thing. Like Dark Souls feels fair to me, but it has a lot to do with your approach and like how you view the games and what makes you feel frustrated versus what makes me feel frustrated. I can't really speak to that. What I can speak to is like that the, the ways Dark Souls expects you to play, and it expects you to take your time. It expects you to see that Black Knight and be like, hold on, do I want to engage this? Is this the way I want to go? Do I actually want to fight this thing? And if you decide to fight it, like, yeah, you'll probably get your ass handed to you if you just go fight a Black Knight the first time you see him. But if you do overcome him, he gives you pretty good rewards for it. You get quite a bit of souls. You get nice drops from him, and especially that first one you encounter does guard some pretty cool equipment that you can get by defeating him and going to where he was standing. And like it's a world that doesn't give a shit about you in a way. Like, and that's kind of what I love about it because it isn't crafted for the player or well, it is obviously, it's a game, it's crafted for the players, but it's built in a way that makes it feel like the world isn't just your playground. The world is dangerous, And if you just do stupid shit like, oh, here's a tall black knight, let's go attack him and see what happens, you get killed.
Yeah, but see, another thing that I think one has to factor in is that Dark Souls is this big open game where uh, you explore a lot of different areas, and when you die, you start off at one of the many different checkpoints, and you're most likely gonna have to take a while to get back to where you were, which is, intentional design. But it still feels like, you go far away, you die, you go back far away, and now it's time to you retrace your steps again. Whereas God Hand is a corridor game. I mean, it's not literally in corridors, but that's the way the game is set up. It's these areas that are essentially rooms. And whenever you encounter something, even the brutally difficult stuff, because the fourth enemy you encounter in that game is one of the hardest enemies you'll be encountering throughout the entire game. The demons that spawn out of random enemies. Um, it still it always gives you a challenge you can actually overcome because okay, this corridor, this part of the level, obviously I'm supposed to be here because there's no fork in the road, there's no other way to go. So that means whatever the game is throwing at me, it's something that I can um, actually accomplish. I think that's also something to factor in. Uh, be,
Well, like the thing with Dark Souls is there isn't any supposed to. There are so many different paths to take through that game, and there is one path that is the smoothest and the easiest, but there is no supposed. Like if you're here, it's because you chose to go here. There's no one chosen supposed path that you're supposed to do this in this order. There just isn't, and it leaves that up to the player. Like God Hand is all about its combat. That's all that game is, right?
yeah.
Dark Souls quite certainly isn't. Like it's a oftentimes punishing game, but it's punishing in ways that do it punishes you based on the decisions you make outside and inside of combat.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Dark Souls sounds more analogous to Grimrock in many ways, because Grimrock is also a game that doesn't give a shit about the player. You
Yeah,
play the first one, yeah.
yeah. I've played quite a bit of the first and a bit less of the second, and those are good games. And yeah, they are probably closer to Dark Souls, and Dark Souls is the God Hand. Dark Souls is somewhere in between because even though it really isn't like you can't approach it like an action game. It still has action game controls, and there are some action game like things you can do to improve at it. But whereas Grimrock is like the least action game ever, the combat is click on weapon. Weapon has a chance of hitting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that the combat in Grimrock is far worse than something in Dark Souls, but I mean, all the things that I complain about in Dark Souls, you can essentially almost say for Grimrock too. I mean, it doesn't give a shit about the player. It punishes you for not thinking. It rewards you for thinking outside of the box or outside of the constraints of the game. But maybe I just have a bad day. Maybe I'll end up loving Dark Souls again, like many people who tried it later on after failing the first time. Uh, actually, you play a lot more board games than me. Are
Yeah.
there any Dark Souls of board games?
Oh God, why did you have to do that? Oh,
We're gonna do that until the end of this episode, sorry.
oh God. Is there any Dark Souls of board games? Well, I mean, in what manner are you speaking here? Like, there obviously isn't a game that is as broad and deep and like huge as Dark Souls is. Like, part of what
Just,
makes
just in,
Dark Souls is its
just in terms of difficulty.
in terms of difficulty. Well,
Yeah,
I still say that that's still tied into how large that world is in some respects, but I mean, there are super difficult board games, of course. Like the thing you have to say though is that many of the many board games are versus other players, it's hard to find one that is like that demanding, that is like a co-op game. I guess Ghost Stories is supposed to be really hard. I haven't played it, but Ghost Stories relies quite a bit on luck management as well,
Hmm.
which is not a concept that Dark Souls even recognizes as a thing. Luck
Yeah,
doesn't exist. Um, like that's a big thing in board games in general, luck management and like risk taking.
yeah. Well, just limit, just capitalizing on chance and maximizing your chances. I mean, that's true for card games as well, or for
Yeah.
anything. Uh, another thing about difficult games that a lot of people, I think a lot of people misuse the term for anything they don't like these days as far as difficult games goes, but it's trial and error. So when I say trial and error, I essentially mean a game which you have absolutely no way of finishing in theory on your first try. I mean, it's not assumed that you will die. You will literally have to die to figure out what works and what doesn't.
I mean, I think that's more a little bit of a like a scale. It's not like when people talk about trial and error, that has a lot to do with their personal, like what they personally are good at in games, and it's really hard to just say whether a game truly is trial and error for everybody. And like, I think trial and error is a symptom of a few different things. One of them is like not enough Q&A, not enough playtesting of a game, but really most games are trial and error to some extent. Like, do you expect to just be the best at the game before dying several times, before losing several times? I don't
You'd
think
be
anyone can really expect that.
well, you'd be surprised at how many people expect that. It's all. I mean, I can't imagine anyone beating a Sierra game like King's Quest or Space Quest on their first try. I mean that the chances of that are so minimal.
They're astronomical. They're insane. Those
Yeah,
are also like the extreme examples of trial and error. If we want to like talk about games that are strictly that, uh, Sierra games are among the few that could probably be considered objectively trial and error games.
yeah. So, where, I mean, where do you think this obsession with difficult hardcore games comes from?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of things. Part of it, like, there's a nostalgia factor to it that people remember hard games from their childhood. It's also part of the pushback against the mainstream, and there's always going to be a sort of counterculture within every subculture. And the difficult games, hardcore quotation marks crowd is one of the countercultures that exist within gaming.
Uh, I mean, we've seen a revival of roguelike as a concept. I'm not gonna even say roguelikes because the name as a genre doesn't mean anything anymore now. But mostly just that design approach of permanent death and random difficulty and replayability. I mean that's also become fairly popular recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to just ascribe one reason why those became popular. Well, in a way, Spelunky is the reason why those became popular, because Spelunky became a huge hit, and then suddenly everyone was like, what if we took the things that Spelunky took and put it in other games? And then an explosion of those kind of things happened. Like, that was a reaction on the part of the game developers, really. And then
Yeah,
an audience found those games and different kind of people that uh, was attracted to different implementations of that. I mean, I love Spelunky, but I hate most of the implementations of the roguelite is the term that many people use
yeah,
now. I
yeah.
mean, I think Binding of Isaac is like a terrible game.
Oh god, I dislike that game so much.
It's like the thing I really love about Spelunky is that it it just lets you become better at your own pace. It doesn't like try to set goals for you and try to like control your pace of improving. It just lays out a groundwork. These are the rules. Explore them, learn them, figure out how to work within them to become better at the game. And I just I love that approach to things. It's the complete opposite in Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac, like, just gates unlocks, and those unlocks are like 90% of the content of the game. Like most of the power-ups, most of the enemies, most of the bosses, most of the everything are like things that you unlock as you go on throughout the game. I find that really really annoying when dealing with a roguelite game.
It's not even just that. I mean, Bind of Isaac was a combination of things for me at least. I mean, it's based off of Zelda dungeons, as in it felt like NES Zelda dungeons, not for
Yeah, definitely.
example Link to like not like Link to the Past dungeons. And it's I really that I don't feel like that in particular has aged well as a concept. But even in addition to that, it's really luck based to the point where I mean roguelikes are essentially luck based. It's a roll of the die. You might get a good run, you might get an awful run. But this was since you knew on which level the mom boss was. For example, if you got to that level, you could just look at your power ups and say, okay, my build is not gonna work. I'm gonna die. I mean, the chances of me beating the game now with these skills, it's literally either impossible or way beyond what I can do. And in most cases, that feels crappy because if you make a mistake and you have very few choices. I mean, you have choices in the shop or something like that, but most of it is just what the game gives you.
The possibility space in Isaac is just really narrow. I think that's the core issue, really. Like, you get uh, these power ups, you get these abilities, you face these enemies, but there's usually like just one correct way to go about things. And then
Yeah,
you just do the thing correctly and hope that it works out. I don't find that very interesting. NetHack, like as a direct comparison, because NetHack is like the most popular, most it's the standard of the
yeah.
roguelikes. Because even though Rogue founded the genre, NetHack standardized it. NetHack brought all the things together into one package that like defined what that genre was from that point on. And NetHack has a lot of luck, but it also creates a very vast possibility space with a lot of different decisions you can make. Like, you might have, like, okay, this enemy is coming at me. I have a wand in my inventory. I don't know what it does. Do I decide that this enemy is too dangerous? I need to take a chance and just point the wand at the enemy and see what it does. Yes, that decision is a very interesting decision to make. And then something happens. Then you decide to use the wand. You point the wand at the enemy, and something happens. Maybe the enemy gets turned into stone, and then you block this corridor off. Or maybe it throws a fireball at it. But whatever it does, it changes the entire way you think about your environment. Whatever happens has a profound impact on everything that happens after it. Binding of Isaac doesn't really have that. Well, the power ups you get have a profound impact on everything after that, but you don't get to make a lot of small decisions that have impact later on. It's just which power up do I pick? And that's really the game.
I feel like the Binding of Isaac's power up system, which is its biggest strength, felt like it would work far better than something like a shoot 'em up or whatever, where it makes more sense. But generally, yeah, I agree that Binding of Isaac wasn't really a good example of either difficulty or the roguelite approach.
Then again, there's
Which
lots of people who love that game. I don't understand why, but it has found
uh,
an audience, and that's one way of going about it.
it felt kind of like a disappointment after Super Meat Boy because Super Meat Boy's approach to difficulty, save for that one boss fight, was extremely well thought out.
Super Meat Boy is super cool. It's one of the best examples of the platformer in a modern incarnation.
It is.
But I'm not entirely sure that Binding of Isaac could have actually taken much from it successfully because they are so different games. The problem
Well,
with the problem with Isaac isn't that it's not enough like Super Meat Boy. The problem with Isaac is that it made decisions that doesn't really fit with what it actually is. Like it especially the decision to just copy the form of the NES Zelda dungeon felt like it's a completely nostalgia motivated decision. It doesn't really fit with the rest of the game, how the rest of the game is designed. It's like you just took the part instead of taking the ID. You took the form of it instead of the essence of it, and that never works, in my experience, anyway.
plus, like we said, it hasn't aged well. I mean, I played the first Zelda for the first time um, 3 years ago. It has aged really, really poorly.
Oh yeah, like in my opinion, the original Zelda is kind of a shit game by today's standard. It just kind of
Yep.
is. It has a massive legacy. It has an enormous, enormous legacy, and its legacy is to be respected. But its form, like what it actually is, how it is to play it, is not. It's not
I,
to be
I, I,
respected.
I completely agree with that. I mean, I absolutely adore A Link to the Past, which is essentially the first Zelda, just very, 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 very improved.
A Link to the Past is like it discards some cool ideas from the original Legend of Zelda. I'm not gonna say that everything A Link to the Past did was a good idea. It made the game significantly easier. It still wasn't a cakewalk, but it wasn't like a super hard game the way the first one was, and it didn't really reward exploration in exactly the same way that the original did. In a way, Dark Souls is the first game to actually take like some of the ideas that the original Zelda had and that then were discarded and use them in a modern way. And that's super cool, but those ideas wouldn't didn't really work in the Zelda universe, in the Zelda mechanics.
You just missed an opportunity to say that the first Zelda was
No,
dark.
no.
But yeah, uh, there's also another big thing about difficulty in games, which it's something that's one of the things I rarely have an answer to, and it's that example that everybody quotes on Facebook, social media, and whatnot, and it's that book and video game comparison in the sense of, oh well, you can read a book and the book will never say, oh, this is too hard. You need to be good enough to actually read the rest of the book. Whereas in games, you can be blocked out by not being able to complete something.
I think that's a faulty comparison because there are certainly books that are too hard for some people. There are certainly books that I wouldn't understand, that I wouldn't get anything out of. And like the idea that games are unique in that they have things that are hard for some people to access is just wrong. We do it in a different way than many other mediums, yes, but we're not unique in doing so. And it should not be considered a fault, not in the least, because just like every other medium has entry level things, things that most anyone can experience, but also has those less accessible things, and those less accessible things often has really high value to those people who can and do enjoy and access those things.
Um, I think it's also a bit of this consumer mindset that I paid for it, I should have complete and utter control and access to it. Um, for example, uh, for example, I bought, I got the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance as a gift. That's 400 pages of it's a philosophical book. I mean, it has a story and everything, but it's essentially a philosophical book. And I read it till the end. I got my, well, you can say money's worth out of it, whatever, but it feels a lot like something I haven't read because I missed so many cues out of it because it was just it just was on a higher level than I was.
The thing that like I see all the time, maybe less now in the last couple of years, but like this idea that every game needs to be for everyone is just crazy. Diversity isn't about making every game for everyone. No game can ever be for everyone. That's never going to happen. That has never happened.
Did you know
Being
how?
being
Yeah, for
inclusive
sure.
is about having a great variety of things, having something for everyone, not having one thing for everyone.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Do you know how hidden object games actually approach that issue of I cannot get my money's worth out of this? They have this hint button which you can use because those games are very step by step oriented and you can't really get in a situation that's unpredicted. So you have this hint button which will always tell you this is where you need to go, and then when you're on that place where you need to go, you can click it again and it'll say, okay, this is what you need to zoom in on, and then you can click it again if you're zoomed in on something. Okay, this is what you need to either pick up or use in something. Or when you're playing the puzzle sections, which you need to progress, you can always skip them. So it's this uh, this concept of bypassing certain barriers or content, like this issue, was resolved by adding that kind of workaround, which I think, but I haven't seen, was also done in the latest Alone in the Dark, the last one,
I
where you
think
could actually skip sections.
I think that's something that is the correct decision for some games. Certainly, I don't necessarily know which games that would work best for, but I doubt it's something for every game. I mean, like Dark Souls, for example, it would be a terrible, terrible idea to put something like that in Dark Souls. It's completely against the spirit of the game, and like those kinds of decisions are something that needs to be done at an individual game level. Like, what is the spirit of the game? What is the point of this? And does this solution fit within that vision?
Let's take um, I mean, I'm not gonna use Dark Souls as an example for this because it has online components. But let's take a single player game, for example. If that game uh, would give you a skip button and that only impacted you, it didn't impact someone who played the game without using the skip button, would that actually make a worse experience for that player instead of just completely blocking off the player? Like, so is it worse? Is it a better solution to say, okay, this player isn't good enough to finish this part of the game and he will be stuck here forever and he will never finish it? Is that better than just saying, oh yeah, if he is stuck here, he can just click a button and he will bypass that and continue for the rest of the game?
Well, I mean, I think that depends on the game. If I was designing a game, I would never put such a skip thing into it because I personally do not enjoy games that have such tools available. If I am playing a game and like there is just a way to skip past the hard part, that makes it feel so much less interesting to me. Like just knowing that I could just skip this devalues the entire experience for me. And I think that's like a common overlooked thing with these sorts of mechanics.
It's also difficult to determine whether if you do that, like you cheapen the experience, but then again, if it's not motor based, uh, like a mechanics based problem, if it's something you have to figure out, you can always just go online and figure it out.
Yeah, sure, but like I would rather have that be a step away from the game than rather than a thing baked into the game. Like I am feel more fine going to GameFAQs and looking up something than I feel having this like a button inside the game to skip it. And like that's an entirely philosophical difference, and other people may and will disagree with that, but it's my personal the way my brain is wired. I do not get this nearly the same level of satisfaction of doing something in a game if it could just be skipped.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does feel like the internet has kind of killed off a bunch of possible solutions to games. I mean, you have to be. And here's the reason, like they need. I follow the Legend of Grimrock forums and discussions a bit, and I think it took 4 days or 5 days. I'm not sure. Maybe it was a full week to figure out all the secrets, but that was a full week for the entire player base to figure it out. Whereas they made what was it? PT, the Silent Hill concept teaser, and they expected people to spend weeks, if not months, trying to figure it out and beat it, and people figured it out within 4 hours.
Part of the problem with PT was also that, like, apparently it's at least partly random how to access the final secrets in it. And when you make something partly random, you can't really control when it's going to occur. And then all of a sudden it occurred for a couple of players.
I
And
mean, you can still. I mean, if they wanted to do that, they could have just flipped the switch after a certain time and for that random factor.
yeah, it's still it's like it's kind of stupid to just like put it on random and expect it to take like a week or weeks for someone to figure it out, and then like because it's random or at least partly random, it just happens for someone after
Mm,
a day or so.
uh-huh. But yeah, it does feel like a lot of that's quote unquote magic of discovery is kind of ruined when you can just go online and have someone else figure it out for you.
Yeah, definitely think there's like that ruins a lot of discovery, and I think that's one of the really cool things about some of these roguelites, but also other like really mechanical games, is that they can create situations that aren't scripted that someone else hasn't seen already. You can get situations in Europa Universalis 4 or Crusader Kings 2 or Spelunky that are different from what every other player has seen. I think that's a super cool thing. And
It is, but then it also gives you. I mean, then you have to have that random factor in, and randomness isn't suited for every game.
no, obviously not. But I mean, there's randomness and there's randomness. The only randomness, well, okay, that's not true. But like the main randomness you encounter in Crusader Kings and Europa Universalis is like what is does the AI decide to do? And because you have like thousands of AI systems interacting with each others, that creates like an illusion of a more coherent world than actually exists in the game, and that's super cool to me.
Hmm. And what do you think about scalable difficulty? And let's say this is one of the comparisons I mentioned before we started this talk. Is for example, you have Legend of Grimrock, which just says, this game is entirely custom made. We placed all the items and enemies by hand, so if you make the wrong decisions with your characters, well, sorry, that's your issue. And then you have Mass Effect, which which just scales in the sense of you can be whatever you want, you can carry whichever team you want. Essentially, you'll be able to overcome almost all of it.
I mean, scalable difficulty is not necessarily always a bad idea or a good idea. I think whatever avenue you use for your difficulty curve, just make sure to do it well. There are games certainly that use scalable difficulty well, and I think Mass Effect is actually one of the better ones. But you could also end up in a situation where you end up having like all these games that have like 5 different difficulty settings. Many of them end up being like only one of them is actually well paced and the rest of them suck. And that's just a shitty situation, I think.
Yeah, it is. I mean, especially when you don't know whether normal mode is easy or hard mode is actually the normal mode, and it's difficult to figure out what's exactly the way the game is meant to be
Yeah.
played.
I greatly appreciate a game that knows what it wants and what experience it wants to have the player experience, and just presents it without being like, "Hey, you just started this game you've never played before. Choose a difficulty in this game you don't know if you're good at or not." I just think those sort of difficulty selections are rubbish, really rubbish.
Yeah, or even when you have those situations where, oh, I want to play this game on hard. Nope, you have to beat the game on normal mode first before you earn your hard badge, son.
I think that works in some situations, not in all of them. Definitely not all of them. I mean,
Well, Devil May Cry would suck if you have Dante must die from the start.
yeah, and yeah, Devil May Cry is really one of the poster childs for like early, well done difficulty levels because like the first, usually you had like two available, normal and easy at the start.
Yeah.
Wait, the old ones did this big thing where you just had normal available, and if you died enough, you unlocked easy.
Yeah, that was actually in Devil May Cry 3, where if you die enough, the game tells you, haha, you suck, you wanna go easy mode, son?
At least the
Well, not in
first
those
three
work.
did that, and
Yeah.
so by the time the third game came out, I just let it kill me until it unlocked easy mode because I wanted to go through and get all the items and stuff before I face the harder modes.
hmm
But
There's,
I think Devil May Cry is like a rare example of those kind of unlockable difficulties working well, and they also work well in the new one, which is one of the best games ever, in my opinion.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean, Devil May Cry was made by the people who went on to make a bunch of Platinum games, right?
I think some of the old Devil May Cry team are now platinum people. I don't keep
Yeah,
super close track of that kind of stuff.
yeah, which makes sense because Platinum in general has a very good grasp of how difficulty works. You
I
know,
have I have played too few of their games. I've barely dabbled in Bayonetta 1. I haven't played Vanquish. I'm a terrible human being.
oh wow, you should at least play Vanquish. I mean,
The best part is I had like that 2 month PS Plus trial thing, and
and you have
and I
Vanquish
had
Redeemed.
Vanquish and I didn't play it, and then my time ran out and now I can't play it.
Well, if you ever get Plus again, you'll be able to play it.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen in quite a while.
Yeah, Vanquish is good on so many levels, and I'm just gonna leave it at that because that's kind of an episode in and of itself, just Platinum games. You know, you know which one of the harder games which I rage quit aside from Dark Souls was the new XCOM.
XCOM. I don't actually think it's that hard.
Ah, that game, man. I think the worst part about that XCOM is that the chances are utter bullshit, or at least in my run, they were completely off the wall.
They're actually like completely correct. They feel like bullshit, but like I've seen really exhaustive articles written on the subject where they go through and just test how the game does it and like just charts out like a huge number of these random numbers and checks if everything checks out, and it's correct. It is always correct.
Yeah, well. math isn't fun, obviously. At least wasn't for me. I mean, I played that thing on. I restarted that game 3 times. I played it on Iron Man mode. I did like when I went into the alien base unprepared. I learned my lesson and restarted the game, and then went in prepared. And it was I was just because I love turn-based stuff, and I was just completely lost in that game. But at one point, the line of sight, the random chances, they just killed the wrong person, and I flipped my table.
The line of sight, it's like if you just you need to think about it as a board game because it's designed as a board game. And like the line of sight looks stupid as shit when you start looking at like the animations they use in combat and how they move around and stuff. But if you just think about it like a board game and like, okay, this guy is on this square and the line of sight rules work like this. Like they actually just stole the line of sight rules from Descent Second Edition. That's actually what they did.
Yeah.
It's slightly modified, but it's Descent Second Edition line of sight rules. And it was so easy for me to recognize because I played Descent enough to like know exactly how it works.
So Descent lets aliens shoot above counters, through shelves, through a glass door, through a pillar, and crit a heavy in the best armor in the game and drop
the
him to
way the way the line
death.
of sight rules work in XCOM and also in Descent is that each each unit is on a square. If you can draw a straight line from
Yeah,
any point within that unit square to any point within the target square, and it is not obstructed by a solid object you can't shoot through, you can hit it. That means that if like we have three squares like on a line, in the middle is a pillar, on the one side is a soldier, and on the other side is an alien. You can draw a line of sight line from the corner of your box to the corner of the alien's box while tracing along the side of the pillar's box. And
that's how D20 RP system also works.
yeah,
Same thing.
that's basically the line of sight rules, and it's just so abstracted. But because XCOM is like, oh, it's a modern game, and we need to have these fancy graphics, and the graphics do not match the very abstract
Oh,
nature
they
of
do not. They
like
do
you
not
just need
one
to
bit.
ignore like how the units stand and like how they poke out of cover and stuff because none of that is relevant. It doesn't matter if the unit is like entirely covered in this cover he's behind. He can still be hit because line of sight rules.
Yeah, but that's a pretty shit thing to say. I mean, oh yeah, the game is good. Just ignore everything you see.
The game is good, just pretend it's a board game.
Well, then it's still bullshit to miss point blank 95% with a fucking shotgun.
Well, you had a 5% chance to miss, and what do you know? That happened. As long as it's not 100%, it's not 100%.
Well, it's never 100%. I mean, like,
It is
is.
actually. If you do start to get like the later checks, you start to have a high number of 100% shots, especially if you start having high ground a lot and getting like the flying armor and stuff. Like fly around with a plasma rifle and shoot things on the ground. 100% on fucking everything. You get so OP later on in XCOM.
I don't know. Like I said, I tried that game 3 times, and after the third restart, and after that, I was, I don't know, 10 hours in, whatever, I just couldn't handle it. I also had this. There was also this kind of bullshit where I didn't invest in interception tech, and despite stopping all crises, despite doing well on everything, the board was all, oh, you failed to intercept 2 saucers. Grade D minus. We are not satisfied. But I saved millions. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, they improved the strategic part of the game a lot in the expansion. It's a lot less harsh about like, oh, these countries are panicking because of things you can't do shit about. It's much more it's much more likely to like give you opportunities to combat it.
Well, but maybe that's the way the game's meant to be played. Maybe it's all a metaphor how you can't actually save everyone.
Well, I mean, yeah, you can't actually save everyone in XCOM. You're probably not going to keep every country from panicking, but you're probably going to keep most. You can keep most of them with you,
Uh,
and it's like the XCOM seems really glitchy when you look at it because it doesn't explain its rules very well. But if you do manage to intuit those rules, it actually follows them perfectly. I've never seen an actual glitch in XCOM. I've just seen a lot of shit that isn't displayed properly.
I think that's actually a big issue. I mean, you can get away with a shitty system if you make it sensible enough visually, but it's very difficult to get away with a good system if it doesn't make sense
Yeah,
with
like
what you see.
a lot of the problems with XCOM is that it uses a board game system, but because it's not a board game, it isn't constrained to like actually telling the player how it works. Because like in a board game, of course you need to tell the player how it works, otherwise they can't enforce the rules. But because the
Yeah.
video game does that for you, it doesn't have to. They can just make environments that look different from how they behave because that's how video games work, and it's one of the greatest flaws with XCOM. It's the single biggest problem with it.
And I think for closing words, since we've been at this for quite a bit, what is the single hardest game you have played in your entire life?
Single hardest game. I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm really shit at Contra, but that's probably not the hardest game.
Nah, I mean, like Contra is. I mean, Contra is just basically you'll eventually get good at it. There's no doubt about it. You just need to play enough of it.
Yeah, and I haven't. Contra 4 I found really hard. DS1, but again, I'm just not good at Contra, and I don't know. Like most of the video games I play, I don't find too hard.
Oh, you're
No,
so
I
hardcore.
sound like a total asshole saying that, but I'm just really like I don't really know if there are that many games I find super hard.
Hmm. It's difficult for me to actually say which game I found hard because most of the games I played, I either beat or they weren't hard. I just needed more time to actually get through to them. So I'd probably go with my previous Pac-Mania example simply because that's a game that was one of three games I actually owned from between 91 and 2002, and um, in that entire time, no matter how many times I played it, I never finished that game, and I finished crap like the 8-bit Ghostbusters or Shinobi, which was you know rams a sword up to your health level difficulty.
I have an answer now. The hardest
Okay.
game I have ever played is Dota 2.
Oh man,
Because like I'm serious here. It's the hardest game I've ever played because I've played it for years and years and years, and I've played Dota 1 for years and years and years, and I know people who have played these games like for ages, like thousands upon thousands of hours, and every single one of these people, if you ask them, is Dota hard? They will say yes, Dota is hard. It's still hard. It never stops being hard. There is no such thing as learning all the Dota. It will change before you have learned all of it. You are never done. It's always hard.
I can completely agree with that, and that's why beyond the 17 hours I have clocked in Dota, I'm never touching that thing because if I'm gonna invest thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hours into that, I'm just kind of play fighting games or whatever. I mean, I know people gave me shit because I had 3,500 hours clocked into a single MMO, but that was in a space of 4 years. I know people who have that time, like in 1 year of Dota 2. It's insane.
You old
You're
friends
looking,
who play this game.
you're looking up your time in Dota now, aren't you?
My time in Dota 2 is 404.3 hours. This
That's
is
very
not a
timid.
lot.
That's
Like,
not a lot at all.
key work, 850 hours.
That's
Um,
still not enough. Let me just check the person I know that has the most hours on my friend list on
that,
Steam. Now we awkwardly pause while we browse and ridicule our friends.
Kovac has 2009.7 hours. Niall has 2082.6 hours.
Yeah, sure,
Falcon
drop.
has 2302.7 hours. One of my real life friends has 2718 hours. His friend, who I've played with a few. Wait, actually, another of my real life friends has 3514 hours. And
Ha! I have a friend who has 3,549 hours, so he's better at Dota.
and the guy I on my friends list with the most playing time has 3,918.9 hours. I
Ugh.
played with him once. He's good at the game, but he gets so angry that I'm never going to play with him again.
Well, if I had 4,000 hours in something and I was still losing, I get pretty pissed myself. I mean, I have like, I have, I mean, I don't know the exact hours, but I assume that I have 400 hours maybe in the Blaze Blue series. I still almost throw my controller when I lose. Because the more time you put into a game, it just makes you more enraged.
So I have like 400 hours in Dota 2. Before that, I played Heroes of New Earth, which is like sort of Dota, a bit different. But it was in a better engine than Warcraft 3, and it was before Dota 2 was a thing. So we played this slightly worse version of it for a while, and I've probably got another 400 in that. And I've probably got another 4 to 800 in Warcraft 3 Dota.
That's absolutely not as much as that's the worst thing. Like you tell me now you have 1,200 hours and that's basically the same, almost the same game, and that's little by that game standards.
Yeah, that's not a lot. Like, I mean, I know people who have played years, like literally years of Dota.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, people tell you, oh, everything needs to be as casual as possible, as accessible as possible to have a big player base. Dota is actually the most played game on Steam. League of
Yeah,
Legends
like
has millions upon millions of people. It's brutal, it's hard, and it's free to play. You cannot get more accessible and yet be so, I don't know,
it's not that it's
decimating.
accessible. It's that it it has an appeal to people. It has an appeal to a lot of people, and that appeal is visible even pretty early when playing the game. If you're the
Oh
kind of
yeah.
player who will get hooked by the game, you know it after a few matches. You don't need to go 100 hours to know what the appeal of this is. You just need to play it a little bit, and you start to get a little bit good, start to get a few kills, and then it hooks you, and it doesn't let go. And unlike like, there's a lot of Europa Universalis, I talked about this a bit earlier. Europa Universalis is a complicated game that takes a while to learn, and it is like, it's not an easy game. I know quite a lot of people who have bounced off it and didn't quite understand it. If you spend 100 hours with Europa Universalis 4, you will know about how it works. And if you spend 400 hours, you will find the game really easy. Same thing with Crusader Kings 2. Like, Crusader Kings 2 is not a challenge to me, but it's still like a hard game to learn. Dota, it doesn't matter how much time I spend. I will never find Dota easy because the game just has such an enormous skill ceiling, and every other player is improving at about the same pace I am, or if not a faster pace.
I know when I played that game the first time, like I said, I have 17 hours there. I had fever dreams of that game. Like I go to sleep and just dream Dota, like shaking in the morning. And I'm glad I quit because I know I have people who regularly play, and I know they just if I start regularly playing, I'd always have someone to play with. Just one more match, something like that. So all respect to that game, I'm not touching it. And yes, I agree, it's probably the hardest thing to play, and it's actually you can empirically prove that it's the hardest game even because if someone tells you, "Oh no, it's not the hardest game. The hardest game is I want to be the guy." You let them finish I want to be the guy, and then you tell them, "Here, finish Dota too."
I have played through I Wanna Be the Guy 3 times now.
It's not hard. It's just
It's kind of hard.
it's mostly just bullshit. Hard.
Yeah, but it's hard in bullshit ways a lot of the time, but it's still kind of hard. It's not an easy game to get through.
Yeah, it's not easy, but
It's a challenging game and all that, but it's not Dota. It's not even close to Dota. Of course, it's not even close to Dota. I mean, Dota is a monster of a game. It's a wonderful and horrible monster of a game. It's like it's so good, yet it's so horrible. I hate it, yet I love it.
yeah. Yeah, so in closing, I think we can agree that the real Dark Souls of gaming is Dota 2.
Sure.
And on that note, this has been episode 4, right?
Yeah, episode
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, episode 4, the number of death in Japan, very appropriate. So this has been Mjolnir, your host, and my co-host Johnny, and thank you for listening in. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.